The screen is still glowing when I see it. The projector has been on for 3 minutes. The contract is right there, 30 pages of the deal I spent 6 months building. I have read this document so many times I can practically recite the key sections. But something is wrong. I lean slightly forward and my eyes find the line that should have my name on it. The line that said, in the draft I reviewed 2 weeks ago, Project Lead, Madeline Brooks. It is gone. Not moved to a different section. Not adjusted in formatting. Gone. In its place is a name I did not expect to see. A name belonging to someone who spent most of this project in different meetings entirely. My pulse starts moving fast in my throat. My manager, at the head of the table, clicks smoothly to the next page. We made a few final adjustments before signature, he says, in exactly the voice of someone who does not expect to be questioned. Adjustments. I stare at the screen. The client representatives are opening their printed copies. The executives from my company are settling into their chairs. The pen is already on the table. And my name is gone like it was never there. Nobody reacts. That is what I notice first. The executives from my company glance at the screen, glance at the pages in front of them, and then look back at my manager the way people look at someone they trust to have handled the details correctly. They were not in the meeting rooms at 11 at night. They did not sit through the calls where the client pushed back on every number. They do not know the inside of this account the way I do. My coworker Daniel sits 2 seats to my left. He knows what the original contract said. I can tell from the way he is studying his copy without looking up. The client representatives, 3 of them, are flipping through their printed pages. The CEO, a calm and deliberate man named Arthur Wynn, sits at the far end of the table. He has not opened his copy yet. He is watching the room. My manager smiles at the group with the relaxed confidence of a man who believes the hard work is behind him and the rest is paperwork. He thinks this deal is done. He has no idea that the most important person in that room, the one who actually knows who built this relationship, is sitting at the far end of the table, watching everything with quiet, steady eyes. Before I tell you what happened next, let me tell you what led here. This story didn't start in that conference room. It started 6 months earlier, with a client account nobody wanted and a manager who had mastered the particular skill of letting other people do the hard work and then standing in the right place when the recognition arrived. My manager removed my name from the contract at the last minute. Then the client refused to sign without me. My name is Madeline Brooks. I have worked in consulting for 7 years. I know how deals are made, the real way, not the version described in presentations. I know what it takes to rebuild trust with a client burned twice before. I know how to sit in a room and answer hard questions without flinching. What I did not fully understand, until that conference room screen showed me exactly what had happened, was how thoroughly my manager had been preparing to step forward the moment I finished carrying this project over the line. I had spent 2 years watching him work. I thought I understood him. But some lessons only land when you see your own name disappear in front of an audience. That is when everything becomes very clear. 6 months before the signing meeting, the Wynn account was a problem nobody wanted to own. Arthur Wynn ran a regional supply chain firm that had gone through 2 consulting companies in the past 18 months. The first had misread their operational structure entirely. The second had gotten partway through the engagement and fallen apart for reasons still being discussed in our industry. By the time Wynn's team agreed to a 3rd meeting, they were skeptical of everything and patient with nothing. My manager volunteered me for it on a Tuesday morning. Madeline is excellent with difficult clients, he said at the team meeting where the account was discussed. He said it warmly. Like a compliment. What I understand now is what he was actually saying. This account is high risk, and if it fails, I want someone else's name attached to it. But if it succeeds, I will be the one who put the right person on it. I accepted the assignment the way I always accepted difficult ones, without making a fuss, without asking for guarantees. I read every piece of background material on Wynn's company that weekend, made a list of the questions I expected, and walked into the first meeting prepared. The first meeting nearly ended before it started. Arthur Wynne arrived exactly on time, sat down without small talk, and spent the first 4 minutes looking at the ceiling. Not rudely, more like a man who had heard the opening slides too many times and was waiting to see if anything different was coming. My manager had prepared an introductory deck. Polished and general, which is fine for clients who want reassurance. Arthur Wynne did not want reassurance. He wanted someone who understood his actual problem. He interrupted the third slide. "I don't need the firm overview," he said. "Tell me why the last 2 engagements failed and why yours won't." The room went quiet. My manager opened his mouth. I spoke first. Not to cut him off, I had spent the weekend preparing for exactly this question. I had read the case notes on both previous firms. I had a specific, honest answer about where each engagement broke down and what we would do differently. Arthur Wynne looked at me for the first time. "Go on," he said. I talked for 11 minutes. He asked 6 follow-up questions. I answered all of them. We got the second meeting. After that first meeting, the way Arthur Wynne's team communicated with us changed. They stopped sending questions to the general project inbox. The messages started arriving directly to me, sometimes to my work email, sometimes to my phone number, which I had shared with their operations director in week 3. Late Tuesday evenings, questions about their warehousing contracts. Friday afternoons, requests for a second look at projections we had revised together. Once, a Sunday morning message from Arthur himself about a concern he had and whether I thought it was worth raising before the next meeting. I told him yes, and I told him exactly how. That was when I knew the relationship was real. Not because the messages were frequent, but because of what they were about. A client who trusts you asks questions they haven't already answered in their own heads. Arthur Wynne was thinking out loud with me, which meant he believed I would think back honestly rather than just tell him what he wanted to hear. My manager knew the emails were coming directly to me. He mentioned it once, lightly, as if it were simply interesting information. "They really like you," he said. I smiled and said I was glad it was going well. I thought it was a genuine comment. The real work happened in the spaces between scheduled meetings. The presentations that landed. The ones where Arthur leaned forward and started taking notes, those were built the night before. Not by the full team. By me, at my kitchen table or at the office after everyone else left, rebuilding whatever we had produced during the day into something that would actually work. I rewrote the operational cost analysis twice. The first version was technically correct but didn't address the specific concern Wynne's CFO had about carrying costs. The second version did, and the CFO stopped pushing back. I redid the implementation roadmap entirely after a call in week 7, when Arthur mentioned almost in passing that their team had never managed a major transition during peak season. That one sentence changed the shape of our whole approach. Nobody else on our team had caught it. My manager attended the major presentations. He was good in those rooms, easy energy, quick with a reassuring response when the client looked uncertain. I do not want to pretend he contributed nothing. But there is a difference between performing confidence and building the content that makes confidence possible. I built the content. He performed. For 3 months that arrangement was unspoken but understood by both of us. Whenever the client praised the work, my manager responded the same way. He would smile, genuine and warm, and say something like, "The team has really put in the effort on this one." Then his eyes would move to me, briefly, just half a second, before moving on. Such a small gesture. Easy to dismiss as nothing. But I noticed it every time. Over 6 months of noticing it, I understood what it meant. Private, deniable acknowledgement. The kind that costs him nothing and gives me nothing in any official sense, but that confirmed he knew. He knew who was doing the work. He knew who the client was responding to. He just didn't want that knowledge to become the version of events that got written down. Our operations director mentioned the win account at a company-wide update in the third month. Strong progress on a complex engagement, she said. She looked at my manager, who nodded. Nobody looked at me. I went back to my desk and spent 45 minutes building a revised risk register for the next win presentation because it was due in 2 days and nobody else was going to do it. I did not say anything about the meeting. I told myself recognition would come when the deal closed. I was not wrong. I was just wrong about who would receive it. The shift started about 3 months before the signing date. That was when Daniel began appearing in places he hadn't been before. Daniel was a junior consultant on our team, smart, careful with numbers, good at detailed analysis. I had always liked working with him. In a different situation I would have been glad to bring him further into the win account. But the way it happened was not like that. My manager started asking me to bring Daniel to client meetings. Not to support me, to present. Let him take the lead on the operational section, he would say. Good development opportunity. The first time it happened, Arthur Wynn's team asked Daniel a follow-up question he couldn't answer. He looked at me. I answered it. Their operations director, Priya, wrote something in her notebook. After that meeting, my manager said Daniel had done well. He had done adequately. There is a difference. But I noticed something else. My manager had started copying Daniel on emails that previously came only to me. He described Daniel as the day-to-day lead in internal conversations. My role was being quietly repackaged. And I had no language for it yet. That didn't make me sound like I was complaining about a colleague I actually liked. I watched the shift happen in real time and still couldn't stop it. The way it worked was subtle enough that objecting to any one step would have looked like overreacting. Daniel ran the week 8 meeting, he was prepared, and I had helped him get there. My manager handled a round of emails with Wynn's legal team, reasonable, he was the senior person. I was asked to contribute to a section of the proposal rather than lead it. Temporary, I told myself. But temporary kept becoming permanent, piece by piece. What I didn't understand yet was that each small shift was not accidental. It was a step in a deliberate reorganization, a quiet rewriting of who owned what, done gradually enough that there was no obvious moment to push back on. By the end of month 5, the narrative in internal meetings had settled into something I barely recognized. The Win account had become Daniel's client relationship. My contributions were described as analytical support. I kept doing the work because Arthur Wynn's team was still calling me directly and I would not let them down. And because I believed the contract would reflect the truth. The first draft did. My name was clearly listed as project lead. Then 2 weeks passed. The first draft of the contract arrived on a Thursday. Wynn's legal team had sent it to me directly. Before my manager forwarded it to the group, which said something about where they believed the relationship lived. I read through it carefully. The terms reflected the conversations I had led. The scope was right. And on the signature page, under Project Leadership, my name was listed first. Project Lead, Madeline Brooks. I felt something loosen in my chest when I read that line. Not pride. Relief. The kind of relief that comes when something uncertain for too long finally resolves the way it was supposed to. I forwarded the draft to my manager with a brief note saying the terms looked solid and I had small comments on the liability clause. He replied quickly, "Great. We'll review and send to the full team." Over the next 2 weeks we went through standard revisions. I handled most of the back and forth with Wynn's legal team. 4 rounds of comments. I addressed all of them. My manager was copied on everything. I did not look at the final version before the signing meeting. That was the mistake I did not know I was making. The last small, ordinary thing that made everything that followed possible. The signing meeting was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10. Our large conference room. Good projector. Long table. Catering arranged. My manager had sent a confirmation email to Arthur's team 2 days before. I arrived at 9:30. The room was already set up. Printed copies of the contract sat at each place. My manager arrived at 9:40, relaxed, moving around the room with the ease of someone who had already decided how the morning would go. He asked if I wanted coffee. I said yes. He got it for me with the generous manner of a man feeling good about the day ahead. In 15 minutes the client would arrive. In 20 minutes the contract would be on the screen. In 30 minutes, he believed, Arthur Wynne would sign. I sat down, picked up the printed copy in front of my seat, and began reading from the beginning. Not because I expected anything wrong. I always read documents before meetings. I reached page 6. I read the project leadership section once. Then I read it again. My name was not there. Daniel's name was on the line where mine had been. I set the contract down carefully in front of me, placed my hands flat on the table, and breathed. 10 minutes until the client arrived. When Arthur Wynne arrived, he did not look like a man in a hurry to sign anything. He came in with 2 members of his team, Priya, the operations director I had worked with most closely, and their general counsel, Oliver Rains, who had been on every legal call. They took their seats. Arthur accepted coffee. He set his copy of the contract in front of him without opening it. He looked around the room. His eyes landed on me and he gave a brief, direct nod. The kind of nod someone gives a person they are genuinely glad to see. Then he looked at my manager, then at Daniel. My manager opened the meeting with his standard warmth, thanked Arthur for the partnership, described the engagement in broad positive terms, and began walking through the contract on the projected screen. Page 1. Scope of work. Page 2. Timeline and deliverables. I sat with my printed copy open to page 6 and looked at the line where my name was not. Page 3. Compensation terms. I breathed slowly. Page 4. Project leadership and team composition. The screen showed this section. Daniel's name appeared under project lead. Arthur Wynne had still not opened his printed copy. He was watching my manager. The room was very quiet. My manager did not pause on page 4. He clicked through it without giving the room time to settle on the words. He moved to page 5 and continued talking about the delivery schedule in a fluid, confident voice. I was watching Arthur Wynne. Arthur was not watching the screen. He had opened his printed copy and was reading page 4. Not scanning. Reading. His finger moved slowly down the page. Priya, sitting to his left, had done the same. She found the line. She looked up at me immediately. I held her gaze for 1 second, then looked back at the screen. My manager had moved to page 6. His voice had the easy rhythm of someone approaching the finish line. Arthur Wynne closed his copy. Not with frustration, carefully. The way someone sets something down when they have seen enough. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked at my manager with an expression that was very calm and very specific. My manager looked up from the screen and saw that expression. He did not stop talking immediately. He should have. Arthur Wynne let my manager finish his sentence. Then he said, in a quiet and even voice, "Where is Madeline's name?" The temperature in the room changed. Not louder. Very still. My manager responded without missing a beat, which told me he had prepared for this. Madeline was essential during the early phases, he said. She contributed a great deal to where we've arrived. For the ongoing implementation, we've positioned Daniel as the day-to-day lead, which reflects how the team has evolved. He said it smoothly. Warmly. The voice of someone explaining something reasonable. Arthur Wynne looked at him for a moment without speaking. Then he looked at me. Madeline, he said, is that accurate? Is that how the team evolved? The entire table was watching me. My manager was watching me with an expression that was professionally pleasant, and behind that pleasantness was something telling me clearly to be careful. I was careful. I was also honest. The work I did on this account went well beyond the early phases, I said. Every major deliverable, every client-facing document, and every conversation that shaped this contract came through me. I handled this account from the first meeting through the final draft. The room was completely silent. My manager responded before the silence could settle. Madeline is being modest, as she always is, he said. His tone was still warm and controlled. She was absolutely central to the work. But this is about the implementation phase, where Daniel's strengths are best applied. This is a compliment to both of them. He looked around the table with the open confidence of a man redirecting a conversation. Arthur Wynne did not redirect. I'd like to understand this better, Arthur said. He opened his printed copy to page 4. This contract has been in development for 6 months. In every negotiation, every revision call, every discussion about terms, Madeline was the person I spoke with. Her name was in the initial draft. I am looking at a final version where it has been replaced. He set the copy down. I would like to know when that decision was made, and why it was made without a conversation with us. The executives from my company were now looking at my manager with different attention than they had 2 minutes ago. My manager's smile held. But it had tightened. That's a fair question, he said. Let me explain the team structure. I'd like Madeline to answer, Arthur said. The room waited. Everyone at that table was looking at me. My manager was looking at me. His expression was professionally pleasant, but underneath it I could see the calculation running. Was there a version of what came next that kept the deal intact and his version of events in place? I did not look at him. I looked at Arthur Wynne. The name change was made without my knowledge, I said. I reviewed the draft 2 weeks ago. My name was listed as project lead. I was not told it had been changed before I arrived this morning. Complete silence. Arthur nodded once, slowly. Not surprised. Like a man who had suspected something and was watching the confirmation arrive. Priya had her notebook open and was writing. Oliver Rains, the general counsel, set down his pen and folded his hands. My manager said, there was a miscommunication in the revision process, was there? Arthur said. He said it the way someone speaks when they want a precise answer, not a managed one. My manager stopped talking. The silence that followed was not brief. It was the kind that fills a room when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, and everyone present is deciding what it means. Arthur Wynne reached forward and closed his contract folder. Not aggressively. Deliberately. The way someone performs an action when they want everyone in the room to understand exactly what it means. I'm not going to sign this today, he said. 2 executives from my company shifted forward. My manager opened his mouth. Arthur continued before he could speak. We came here prepared to sign the contract that reflected the engagement we experienced over the past 6 months. That contract had Madeline's name on it. He looked at my manager directly. The version on this table does not. I don't sign agreements that don't reflect the reality of who I'm working with. He was not angry. He was precise. There is a quality to someone who has run a business through 2 failed consulting engagements. They do not overreact, but they do not pretend. Arthur Wynne had not built his firm by accepting surfaces. He knew what a real relationship was. We can reschedule when the contract reflects what actually happened, he said. He stood up. His team stood with him. My manager extended his hand. Arthur shook it briefly. Then Arthur looked at me. Madeline, he said. I'll be in touch. The room after they left was one of the quietest I have ever sat in. Arthur Wynne's team walked out at 10:47. The door closed behind them. For a few seconds nobody said anything. My manager was still standing at the head of the table. The warm, confident energy he had carried into the room had left with the client, and what was underneath it was visible now in a way it hadn't been before. He looked at me. I looked back at him. The operations director from my company. A woman named Claudia Farrow, who had been sitting near the door, spoke first. "I think we need to step into the executive conference room," she said. Not heated. The voice of someone managing a situation they have just realized is larger than they understood. My manager nodded and moved toward the door. Daniel, who had not said a single word during the entire meeting, stood and gathered his things with the careful movements of someone hoping not to be noticed. I stayed in my seat for a moment. I thought about the name deleted from page 4. About 6 months of late nights and early mornings and everything that had gone into building what Arthur Wynne had just refused to sign away. Then I picked up my contract copy and followed. The internal conversation lasted 40 minutes. Claudia Farrow ran it. She was careful and methodical, asking questions rather than making statements. The approach of someone who knows that accusations without documentation create more problems than they solve. She asked my manager to walk through the revision process. He described it in terms of team evolution, project phases, skill alignment. Still smooth. Still controlled. But the room he was in was different from the one he had planned for, and the people listening were no longer his intended audience. Claudia asked when the name change had been made. He said it was part of the final revision. She asked who had authorized it. He said it was an internal resourcing decision. She asked if I had been notified. He paused for a fraction of a second too long before he said yes. Claudia looked at me. I told her I had not been notified. I had seen the change for the first time on the screen. The draft 2 weeks earlier had my name on it and I had not been part of any conversation about changing it. She wrote something down. She asked if I had documentation of my involvement. Yes, I said. I have everything. Within 2 hours the questions had spread beyond that conference room. By mid-afternoon I had been asked to send my project records to the operations team. I had everything ready, organized, dated, clearly labeled, the same folder system I had maintained since the first Wynne meeting 6 months earlier. Emails. Meeting notes with timestamps. Draft documents showing my name as author in the file metadata. The full revision history of the contract, which showed clearly when my name had been removed and from which login the revision had been made. I sent it all without commentary. The documents said what they said. The account was now in suspension. Arthur Wynne's legal team had sent a brief message stating that their client was pausing the engagement pending clarification of the project leadership terms. The contract was one of the larger deals our team had closed that year. Senior leadership was now involved. Daniel came to my desk in the late afternoon. He sat down and looked at his hands before speaking. I didn't know about the name change, he said. I found out the same morning. I should have said something. I looked at him carefully. I know, I said. Thank you for telling me. He nodded and left. I believed him. The investigation moved faster than I expected. By the following morning, the operations team had gone through my records and cross-referenced them against the internal project logs. What they found was not only the name change. It was a pattern, a trail of small adjustments made over several months, each one consistent with the others. Emails where my manager had forwarded my analysis to clients under his own name. A project summary sent to senior leadership that used language from a memo I had written without attribution. Meeting records showing I had led every substantive client discussion while being listed as a supporting contributor in my manager's filed notes. None of these things individually would have been enough to act on. Together, laid out in sequence, they described something difficult to explain as misunderstanding. Claudia Farrow called me in the afternoon to say the review was ongoing and I should continue my normal work. She said it in the careful, neutral language of someone who cannot share conclusions yet but wants the person most affected to know they have not been forgotten. I thanked her. Then I went back to my desk and started drafting the revised implementation proposal that Arthur Wynne's team would need when the contract was corrected. I was going to be ready. 2 days after the signing meeting, my manager was called into a private meeting with senior leadership. I was not in that room. I do not know exactly what was said. But I know what happened afterward. Security walked him out of the building before noon. He did not come back. A brief communication from Claudia Ferro's office went out to the department that afternoon, the standard language about a personnel change and a transition in progress, the kind of message that confirms something significant has happened without describing it. I sat at my desk and read it twice. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I had imagined, at various points over the previous days, that there would be some version of satisfaction. A sense of things correcting. There was some of that, a quiet, genuine relief. But mostly I felt tired the way you feel after a long project finally delivers. Not empty. Just finished with something that had required great effort for a long time. I thought about the 6 months of late nights. The calls taken on weekends. The proposals rewritten at my kitchen table because I cared about getting them right. The relationship built with Arthur Wynn's team because I had told them the truth and followed through on every promise. None of that had been erased. It had just taken a moment for everyone else to see it. 5 days after the signing meeting, Claudia Ferro called me into the executive conference room. 2 senior leaders were there. The regional director and the head of client services, a direct man named Philip Okafor who had been with the company 11 years. Philip began by apologizing. He said it plainly, without wrapping it in a longer speech. The company had allowed a situation to develop in which my work had been systematically misrepresented, and the most visible moment of that misrepresentation had happened in front of a client. That was not acceptable and would not go unaddressed. Then Claudia outlined what came next. My name would be restored to the contract as project lead. Arthur Wynn's team had already been contacted and were prepared to reschedule the signing. I would have full authority over the Wynn implementation, with direct reporting access to the regional director. Then Philip offered me the promotion. Senior consultant, effective immediately. I asked 2 questions about the role structure and one about the team I would work with. He answered all 3 without qualification. I accepted. I shook both their hands, walked back to my desk, and let myself feel it, fully and without managing it, for the first time since the conference room screen had shown me my missing name. The contract signing happened 1 week later, on a Thursday morning. Same conference room. Same projector. Different contract, one that reflected 6 months of real work, with a name that should have been there from the beginning. Arthur Wynn arrived exactly on time. He sat down, accepted coffee, and opened his copy. He read the project leadership section without rushing. Then he looked up. "This is accurate," he said. "Let's proceed." He signed on page 17. The deal was done. Afterward, while his team gathered their things, Arthur came to where I was standing. "I want you to know I was not surprised by what happened in that first meeting," he said. I had noticed. Priya had noticed. When a client calls someone directly, it's because they know who they're actually working with. We just needed to understand the situation before we committed. I thanked him. He nodded. "Don't let people do that to you twice." I told him I wouldn't. 6 months after that conversation, the Wynn implementation became the strongest performing contract in our division that year. Arthur's team stayed with us, and 3 additional accounts came in through referrals he made personally. Every one of those clients called me directly. That is the thing about building real relationships, no one can remove them from the contract after the fact. They were never just on paper to begin with.